This episode of Bullet Heaven was made possible by Degica Games. In episode 146 of Bullet Heaven, we took a look at Senko no Ronde DUO, released in Japan on the Xbox 360 in 2010 by G-Rev. As the direct sequel to Senko no Ronde Revision X, which saw release in North America as Wartech Senko no Ronde, we came away mostly satisfied with its gameplay, even though graphically and orally it didn't quite measure up to its predecessor. That Senko no Ronde DUO never made it to North America is no real surprise. After all, Wartech was definitely an under-the-radar title to begin with, and its critical reception wasn't exactly flattering. However, it does still enjoy a decent following to this day with its great mix of bullet hell-style shooting and one-on-one versus fighting gameplay. Enter Senko no Ronde 2, reassembly from DUO, released on September 6, 2017 by Degica Games. More than just a port of DUO, Senko no Ronde 2 takes the basic structure of DUO, tweaks the gameplay, changes the character art design, and retains the full story mode from the 2010 release, all in a $40 package. But how does it differ? Is it worth buying again if players have DUO already? Let's take a closer look. As we've seen before, the goal of Senko no Ronde in general is to defeat opponents by depleting their life gauge, one-on-one versus fighting game style. Players take control of mech-style ships known as rounders in a circular arena with a host of different weapons and abilities. After battling in a best 2 out of 3 fashion, stage progression or game over will occur depending who bites it. Timeouts are also possible, as with most fighting games. With 14 different characters and alpha and beta cartridges for each rounder for a total of 28 machines, there's a lot of choice to experiment with to find a rounder that works for a player's style. Different cartridges also mean that the rounder's operator is changed up as well, and this changes the abilities available for use in the game. Players familiar with the many ballet shooters we've seen on Bullet Heaven so far are going to be right at home with the controls in Senko no Ronde 2, but Senko no Ronde 2 plays a bit differently by default this time around when compared to 2010's DUO. Players still move their rounder on screen by way of the left analog stick and D-pad as usual, and movement is at least as sharp and responsive as its source material. However, the inputs that players use to fire the weapons and execute other functions has been almost totally remapped. Players fire their primary rapid shots by way of the cross button, while the circle button handles the rounder's secondary weapons, usually homing or piercing laser attacks. In both cases, extended use results in a cooldown period that needs to be waded through in order to use them again, indicated with various sound alerts. A melee attack can also be performed by tapping either the primary or secondary fire buttons if the player gets the opponent within the rings that either weapon represents. If a barrier is active, it can be countered and broken by way of the secondary melee attack. The square button is used to engage the rounder's barrage attack, which will spread ordnance around the circular playfield in ways that are more effective in corralling opponents into areas better suited for attacking with more direct means. Players also have access to special moves that are activated with directional inputs and specific attacks, adding even more choice for a player to best take on an opponent. Barrage attacks and special attacks require energy from a gauge located under the player's life bar. Most abilities that require energy use at least one bar to execute. Different rounders also have different amounts of maximum energy. When depleted, an overheat indicator lets players know that energy-based attacks can't be used. Getting hit can also deplete this gauge, which will cause your energy to spill for your opponent to pick up. The triangle button is mapped to a spinning attack that can clear enemy bullets in a pinch. Now we say attack, but it can be difficult to effectively land hits at melee range with this technique. Instead, a better use is to use cleared bullets to fill a player's energy gauge with small green energy pickups that are left behind. Especially with larger bullet swaths, players can turn the tides of battle with a ton of energy very quickly, especially after a particularly harsh series of hits. Dashing is handled by the R2 trigger. This allows players to get out of the way of various attacks much faster than simply moving, and becomes instrumental in effectively playing Senko no Ronde 2 in general. Multiple dashes can be made in rapid succession if fast turns are required as well. Some attacks can also be augmented with dashing as well, adding a layer of strategy to the player's plan of attack. Players can also block the vast majority of attacks they encounter with a barrier that's activated with the R1 button. This barrier is dependent on the energy gauge and will result in enemy energy being released for pickup by the opponent, indicated in orange. The same goes for player shots, indicated in green. In addition to this barrier, if a player or foe is pinned down for an extended period of time, an attack-clearing ring will envelop the rounder automatically to give its pilot a chance to get out of the way and counterattack as best they can. When a player's life gauge is depleted, it will enter Vanish status. When this occurs, any hit the player or opponent sustains will destroy the rounder, and the round will be over. In addition to all of this, players also have a couple of awesome weapons at their disposal to really turn the tides of battle. The first is a special technique which is dependent on the operator accompanying the player's pilot. Extra fire, bomber raids, even healing fields can help the player damage enemies or recover life in a pinch. Finally, players have a special weapon stock that activates the amazing Boss Shell, which transforms the player into a stage-end style boss ship. The player's energy gauge will fully deplete when boss mode is activated, so the more energy the player has, the longer boss mode will last. While in boss mode, players have a yellow armor indicator overlaying the life gauge. If this is depleted, the boss shell is destroyed and battle continues. If players are in Vanish status though, Final Boss can be triggered, which behaves the same way as regular boss, but with way more firepower. If this shell is destroyed, the round will end. However, players that are defeated are given an extra boss shell in the next round as well, allowing for players to better claw back and secure victory for the match. All of these techniques add up to a pretty complicated game in the grand scheme of things, but it all comes together fairly cohesively in the end, especially if a player plays the tutorial stages. Played through 12 stages, the game really comes to a head at the end with single-round boss fights that can really test the abilities of players that have made it as far as they have. Still, the controls, once again, are slow, often stiff, and very methodical. There will definitely be a period of time required to acclimate to Senko no Ronde's unique setup. It's still a much better game than Wartech by a considerable stretch, though. But Senko no Ronde 2 does suffer slightly in terms of its gameplay in a couple of ways. The controls, once again, while more intuitive by default than Duo, are still a bit on the sluggish side, though they are miles better than Rev X. There's also a very sudden difficulty cliff that shoots the opponent rank really high up near the end of the stage set. It becomes extremely hard to either hit with or counter melee attacks, leaving players with only regular, highly dodgeable main and sub-weapons and boss shells to really deal a ton of damage. Practice will definitely alleviate this, but it's definitely jarring, even on the easiest settings. But on the whole, we still really liked it. Senko no Ronde 2 sports a great many game types, including arcade, online, and local versus. Single round, single credit score attack, and the 2010 Senko no Ronde Duo story mode, which was rewritten and localized for North America, complete with original Duo art. Practice modes also exist as well, which can help in getting players more familiar and proficient at piloting their favorite rounders. All in all, there's a ton to play here for fans, especially if local matches and taking on players online is up your alley. For those with ambitions limited only to scoring though, Senko no Ronde 2 still has you adequately covered. The scoring in Senko no Ronde 2 is definitely going to take a backseat to the action. For the most part, players will earn points with every hit landed, so being able to hit an opponent with as many shots and techniques as possible is going to help get the score up. Collecting energy pickups also enhances the player's score by a fair bit, so canceling bullets as often as possible is a great way to boost a player's score. But while there are no special chains to speak of and no real bonuses or multipliers, Stage End will definitely help in boosting a player's score from stage to stage. A good amount of pointage can be added to a player's score with every opponent defeated. In score attack mode, the same rules apply. In any case, when a player's final score is tallied, whether through a 1cc or game over, it can be uploaded to the online leaderboards to stack the player's skill with those around the world. If the player continues after game over though, the score is wiped. Speaking of worldwide features, a secondary score is also applied in terms of experience points, with XP being added under various conditions. Experience and level is used for matchmaking purposes versus players online, and the better a player does, the more experience they will get, and the faster higher levels will be reached. Senko no Ronde Rev X was a standout game with regards to its presentation all the way back in the day, with a combination of amazing visuals and unreal sound that came together in ways that I had no way of anticipating. Senko Ronde DUO, by comparison, wasn't quite as flashy visually and felt less inspired musically, something we explained in episode 146. That Senko Ronde 2 is based almost entirely on Duo. It's no real surprise that, even though it runs at a rock-solid rate, it's still not quite on par with Senko Ronde Rev X. Of course, that's not to say that Senko Ronde 2 is a bad-looking game, far from it, but especially with the game running on such advanced hardware by comparison, it's a little jarring that the visuals lack the kind of volumetric smoke and lighting that gave Rev X such a striking look. The rounders also seem a little flat by comparison to Rev X, especially when it comes down to the boss shells. We do have to admit that the new portraits in Senko Ronde 2 work very well, though. The original game's art can be directly compared in this game, especially with all of the unlockable galleries, and, side by side, Senko Ronde 2 has the better designs. The soundtrack is serviceable and the VO does its job, but on the whole, the sound also isn't as good as in Rev X. Once again, just as in Duo, the best tunes in Senko Ronde 2 come from the first game in the series. All of the VO is in Japanese once again here as well, so while it's now able to be understood by anyone in the West, it's also only by way of subtitles, which can detract from the action somewhat if a player is easily distracted. Speaking of which though, we're not 100% certain that the translation is properly done here. One character in specific, Chrysabarrel, is obviously swearing up a storm, but this isn't conveyed in the script like it was in Japanese.
もう少し手加減したらどうだ。
向こうが悪い。次は100回芝居だな。
Another character, Shinobu, sometimes has a pretty suggestive tone in her voice that doesn't exactly jive with the whole Ansakuroko thing. Of course, with that said, a lot of mileage is sure to be had with the Duo story mode. With an extensive plot, many battles, and colorful characters all sporting Duo's original art, the Duo story mode is sure to supply players with a decent amount of gameplay to get the most out of Senko Ronde 2. It's definitely better than Rev X's reams and walls of text, that's for sure. Rounding out their presentation on PS4 is a set of trophies for players looking to squeeze as much as they can of the game's extensive array of modes and challenges. There are also a ton of galleries to unlock as well, which definitely require multiple playthroughs to get. So, how does Senko Ronde 2 stack up? Let's take a look. In terms of controls, Senko Ronde 2 handles better than Duo thanks to its overhauled inputs. Despite being more intuitive, there's still a learning curve to effectively control a player's chosen rounder. The challenge in Senko Ronde 2 is pretty good on the whole, but some AI opponents can be pretty cheap from time to time. It's still better balanced than Duo. Lengthwise, there is a whole bunch of content to Senko Ronde 2 with multiple modes and playstyles. The Duo story mode is very exposition heavy and lengthens a player's time with the game considerably. The visuals in Senko Ronde 2 are smooth, both in the amount of polygons used and the edges of the models. However, they are still a step down from Rev X, with a distinct lack of visual punch, particularly with boss shells, most shots, and smoke effects. The sound effects in Senko Ronde 2 do a mostly great job where they're used, and the VO is well enough delivered, but the music in Senko Ronde 2, just as in Duo, also suffers with a much less memorable score. The best tunes are still from Rev X. Some effects like the weapon alarms also grate on our nerves a little bit. Senko Ronde 2 is still definitely a great example of what have now, thanks to Deiruna, become known as ballet shooters, a term that seems to have stuck. Well, we're making it stick, like it or not. Making the formula work better than ever and keeping things interesting and tough is just what the doctor ordered, especially after the woefully boring Touhou Genso Rondo. However, outside of a couple of tweaks, it's still just Duo. Great for players that haven't played it, redundant for those that have it and can swing some Japanese. $40 is a decent cost for this particular release, with so much to do and so many things localized for Western consumption. With that said, a physical release is still forthcoming as of this episode. I've always liked the Senko Ronde series and its offshoots, so it's no real surprise that I really enjoy Senko Ronde 2. At the very least, it's an excellent way for people that missed out on Senko Ronde Duo to play the game, whether it was due to region locking or language barriers. As such, Senko Ronde 2 gets a 4.25 out of 5. You can get Senko Ronde 2 for $39.99 US on the PlayStation Network and on Steam today. Ballet shooters are becoming more common, it seems. Not a bad thing for the most part. Here are some other ballet shooters we've taken a look at in the past.